Hey everyone, welcome back. Today I'm so happy to present Paul Antico here with us, coming to us from LA today. Hi, Paul. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much, Beth, for having me. Pleasure.
So, Paul provides psychedelic integration through Panimus Integration based in LA. He is also the managing director of PsychedeLiA Integration, a 501c3 nonprofit founded in 2016. He facilitates a regular integration circle on dosage and healing trauma through PsychedeLiA Integration. Paul is trained as a certified compassionate inquiry practitioner. Dr. Gabor Mate's elegant and insightful approach to healing that fully supports plant medicine work. Paul is also trained as a psychedelic somatic interactional therapist, a powerful body-centered trauma release modality from the Psychedelic Somatic Institute. He also provides Dr. Stephen Porges' Safe and Sound Protocol, which is also SSP, a practical bottom-up approach to help people regulate their nervous system. And you can check out all of Paul's links right here in the show notes and, check out his work. But Paul, I've been hearing about you for a long time and, we've been connected on social media and, I've been wanting to bring you on. And then something I posted, whatever it was, about a month ago, that actually got I think 400 comments on that Facebook post. Your comment was one of the they were all very insightful and it was an interesting discussion, but your comment was like, this is it. This guy knows what he's talking about. So I was like, Paul, come on, let's talk about, therapeutic modalities and psychedelic integration and this interesting world that we're entering into where this is growing exponentially. And we are running into, interesting challenges and questionable places. And, I think it's worth having a discussion. But before that, let's get started with, the question I always ask everybody. What was your story? How did you get into psychedelic integration work and study all these amazing modalities, including Gabor Mate's program? What was your path and what career did you used to have before becoming a psychedelic integration provider?
Well, it depends on how far back we want to go, right? We can start way back with the developmental trauma that started the whole thing, right? That's what I was trying to work through and clear and everything like that. And so I'll just jump ahead to about 10 years ago from there to save all that anguish. Anyway, so I was looking to find a better way to connect and heal. And I've been doing therapy for a long time. And at that time, about 10 years ago, there wasn't, a lot less publicity about it. There was the occasional article. And there was one article with a title that you've probably heard a million times, 10 years of therapy in one night, ayahuasca. I'm like, oh, wow, that sounds pretty useful. I knew nothing about nothing. I was just like, okay, let's just do that. And at that time, they weren't all over the place. So it took me 3 months to find a circle to sit in. And I had to be vetted, and it was a whole production. I was like, oh my God. Anyway, so I went and I did the ceremony finally. And I had a wonderful experience of pure anxiety on steroids for 6 hours. So it was awful. It was like the worst ever. And I was like, where's my mystical experience? But my takeaway from that was, okay, this is how much anxiety I'm carrying around. And it was kind of shocking, really. But that was really the beginning. That's what started me off. And, it was such an intense experience that I didn't go back for approximately 5 years. And in the meantime, I was working with cannabis and I was being very deliberate about it. So I would get anxious, just like ayahuasca, only a lot less, a lot more manageably. I take one hit and I'd be anxious. So I just did that deliberately to be anxious and to try and sit with it. And so it took me over a year to get to a place where, okay, I'm feeling actually good on cannabis. And then I started wondering, well, I'm feeling guilty for feeling good. What's up with that? It's like when we're not used to feeling good and we're waiting for the other shoe to drop. So I was coming, can learn a lot about yourself working with cannabis even. So from there, I went back to, and I found a really wonderful IS circle that was very heart centered. They had wonderful live music. And so my first night with that was also not as bad as the first time, but it still wasn't so great. And I thought, wow, what is going on here? Maybe I just not cut out for this kind of work. And then I had this brilliant idea because I was clearly being overwhelmed. So what if I lower the dose? And I was all like, can I do that? Is that possible? And so I thought it was a big deal. So I went up and talked to the facilitator and I'm like, can I lower the dose? And they're like, sure, no problem. It's fine. I was all worried about it. And so then I kept going. Every month I sat for an entire year. And it was a little bit of a joke. I'd go up to get my cup and they'd say, how much this time, Paul? Because I was like always trying to modulate it a little bit. And, you can't completely because it's a plant after all. So sometimes it'd be a little more than I could handle, sometimes a little less. But I will say the first time that I did lower that dose, I had the best experience. It was a heart opening. I was crying all night. It was just wonderful. And it was, really taught me that, and I have the language to explain it now that I didn't then. I was way outside my window of tolerance. And so when I brought it back in, then I could actually work. Otherwise, you're just busy being overwhelmed. You're not, in polyvagal terms, Stephen Porges thing, if you're in fight or flight or freeze mode, you're not going to really learn. You have to feel safe. So you want to feel safe enough to feel a certain amount of uncomfortability. Then you go too far and it's not so helpful. Anyway, so that really moved the needle for me. And it took 8 months for me to work up from half the cup all the way to the full dose finally. So, that was a real turning point. Because then people were starting to notice things and they're like, you're more confident. And I'm like, and I was noticing, wow, I'm not so anxious in situations that I used to be anxious in. I was like, wow, this is pretty cool. Anyway, so that, I would say that's really what started me off on the path. And then, so then I was really starting to, I was very involved in the community for a long time in LA. So the Aware Project was the first group in LA that was really going. So I was with them, not quite from their beginning, about a year after they started. I was been with them ever since then. And then Sheree Malcolm Gadassi started PsychedeLiA in 2016. She's the one that started that, and I became part of that organization as well. There's another group in LA called Lamps. And we put on a conference at UCLA, a 2-day conference in 2018. I was one of the producers of that conference. And, so just kept very active in the community. And through that, realized that, if I want to help out and support other people, that I wanted to, get some more solid information behind me. And I was looking around going, well, what, there's a lot of things that are being offered and they just seem like, well, I'll just print up my own piece of paper. I don't need, there's no standardization or anything. So Gabor Maté, his Compassionate Inquiry had just come out. And I thought, okay, Gabor, I love Gabor. And that credential to me would mean something. So, I went into the Compassionate Inquiry. And from there, I don't know, I can keep going, I guess, with more stuff or.
Wow. Yeah, no, I love hearing the story. Yeah, I would love to hear. Yeah. And then what?
Well, it was kind of organic. Yeah, so this whole process was kind of organic. I wasn't, the biggest thing I could say is that I was fascinated with it. I wanted my own healing. That was the primary motivator. How can I best, what is healing? How can I, help myself and therefore apply that to others? And I was very involved in the community. So everything just kind of fell into place as just moving through. From Compassionate Inquiry, I got getting exposed to a lot more things. The polyvagal theory was like absolutely fascinating to me, and how Stephen Porges explained the concepts of safety and how when you're in fight, flight, or freeze. And I was, just thinking, gosh, I've been dissociated in freeze for most of my life, which is really, I think about it, it's just sad. And I feel like I've missed out on so much because I just wasn't really present. And so it's coming to terms with that, honoring the whole process. And this is what got me to where I am. And so Stephen Porges' modality is interesting. I mean, there's a whole way of working in that, as far as talk therapy kind of a mode with the polyvagal theory. But the thing that I'm more connected with as far as a provider, Stephen Porges has something called the Safe and Sound Protocol, and it's an auditory intervention. So you wear headphones and it modulates the sound in your ears. And one of the basic premises is that when you're traumatized, your middle ear muscles are not quite working right, in the way that you tend to not filter out the background noise enough to hear the social cues of human speech. So the background noise drowns out the cues from human speech. So what this does is it works out your inner ear muscles so that you can then have the human speech be the dominant thing that you're paying attention to, as opposed to the background noise. So that's super nutshell of Safe and Sound protocol. It's 5 hours. You listen a half an hour a day with headphones. And then if some people can get very triggered from just listening to it. And so then you slow it down. If there's any issues, someone's getting triggered, you stop, slow it. It's really following the safety first situation with that. Yeah, it's really interesting. Anything I'm curious about, okay, let's try it. Let's see how this works.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of good information out there. And then also you can start to recognize some stuff that's just not so effective or useful.
Yeah.
So
I'm curious, when you got into this, and, thank you so much for sharing about this and your path. Were you like working a job job the whole time and going through this profound healing process of, sitting with ayahuasca every month and assuming, maybe doing the therapy or other forms of integration, but were you like also, yeah,
yeah,
like what else was because I'm always curious, like how people shift their careers.
right. Well, I can say due to my trauma, I've had a lot of different careers, some really divergent kind of things. I've actually been paid as a bookkeeper, if you can believe that. And in my youth, I worked at a drive-in theater. How exciting. And so, but the thing I was doing most recently was videography, photography, and graphics. And I was doing a lot of live performance, videography and photography, particularly dance. So that was the world I was, I was in the live performance world primarily, but I did a lot of other photography as well, corporate kind of stuff. And so then the pandemic hit, and it was like, I've been looking for a way to get out of what I was doing and get full time into this more healing work. And the pandemic was like, hello, pandemic. So, it served me really quite well because there was no more live anything. So it just stopped. And, and it went on for quite a while. So everyone sort of figured out the things that they were doing. And that gave me the time to really stop and switch gears and, build up completely. And so that, again, kind of saying things kind of happened organically. I wasn't really like very directive entirely. I kind of knew what I wanted to get to, but I didn't really know how I was going to do this or that. And then life just kind of moved me along.
But okay, let's get into a little bit of this discussion about integration. So it's funny because I thought you've been an integration coach for like millions of years, like one of the originals. But yeah, if it's, like I get it, like the pandemic made it like the real deal for you.
Well,
Your approach must, huh?
I was going to say I was running integration circles before the pandemic.
Oh,
So, I was still with my photography and graphics and video. I was still
oh,
doing that stuff as well. So probably for about 2 years or so, approximately before the pandemic.
wow.
So yeah, everything switched online. So, but yeah,
And then I get it. And then you started seeing clients or taking clients.
Yeah, it's in other words, the pandemic stopped all the other stuff because I was doing both for a
Yeah.
while. Yeah.
Wow. Amazing. So let's talk about your approach to integration. Like I would love to hear about what is it that you offer. You mentioned, your business, and I know you've studied, it sounds like you've studied a lot of different modalities as well. What are your thoughts on what psychedelic integration really is all about? And also like who needs it? Who's it for? Do you believe that this is really an important piece? I'm curious your approach and your thoughts on what psychedelic integration really means.
Yeah, it's a good question because everyone seems to have a little different definition. And now there's the standard definition, of course, integrating all the things that happen to you in a journey and making them part of your daily life. And I like to explain the same kind of thing in a little bit more of a therapeutic way, which is taking the disowned parts of yourself and integrating them so that you're actually become a bigger person. If you're afraid of, let's say, feeling anger, and then that's a disowned part of you, and then you become more comfortable with that anger. Now you can express that without being uncomfortable, so you're actually have a bigger range of emotions. So it's taking those disowned parts and learning to be comfortable with them. And the psychedelic part is where the psychedelics are the catalyst for bringing this stuff up that you wouldn't maybe have such easy access to. So it's all brought up through the psychedelic. But I think of it, you could take away the psychedelic and integration is still a valuable thing to do in your life. So the psychedelic is just providing a lot more material to you more quickly, sometimes too quickly. So you have to be careful with that part. But yeah. So that, I guess, in a nutshell, is how I think overall about integration. And so it depends on what the person might bring in terms of what they're working on. And usually that, of course, has to do with their own psyche and what came up in the psychedelic experience that they had. And, then how do we work with that? And, I would say it's pretty much similar to if someone went to a good therapist and they say, well, this is my issue, or this is what happened, and I have these feelings. And, you wouldn't necessarily treat it that differently. There is the one extra aspect, which is the transpersonal piece, which, sometimes that needs to be understood so you can relate that part in there as well. But,
Yeah.
bottom line is, even with a transpersonal experience, you have to bring it back. How does it affect your day-to-day life? How does that, oneness with the universe and a universal sense of connection, how does that affect me? How does that improve or not? Or should it? My relationships with my partner or my friends or my family. So all those things, just kind of.
Yeah. No, thank you so much. I always have a question about what psychedelic integration like entails. Is it just this psychedelic experience, or is it like literally every day? I personally have been, quote, doing psychedelic integration what feels like my entire life, because I've been working with psychedelics since I was 14 years old. In the last 10 years, definitely like deeper dives into things like dietas and, the ayahuasca and, higher doses, more regular ceremonial working with these medicines. But do you feel that people can truly get like the full benefits of psychedelics with just maybe like one integration session or one circle that they attend after their ceremony? Like, do you feel like that's true integration, or do you feel like that it really is something that's like an ongoing process?
Yeah, it's definitely an ongoing process. It depends, it's like you get out of it what you put into it. And if someone's just going to do one psychedelic experience, for example, they're only going to get so far. And, it's the same idea with one integration session. And a lot of it, I'd say, depends on what comes up. Because a lot of times when you take a psychedelic, it doesn't necessarily mean you're going to get somewhere. Sometimes you could be too overwhelmed. You're busy, navigating overwhelm. So there's nothing really coming up except you're overwhelmed. In my case, like I was just facing the anxiety. That was it. There was nothing else coming through because that was like a blaring message. So, then you would work with that. But again, something like that, certainly not one time. I've been doing this for, the 10 years, right, since that happened. And I still have anxiety. It's way better, but, it's
Yeah.
still, it's a process. And, part of me went, can I eradicate this anxiety? But of course, part of it, again, the big message ultimately, and I find it, for me at least, challenging to really let it deeply sink in, is that we have to accept ourselves as we are first. That means with the anxiety, with everything that we don't like about ourselves, we have to say, I'm okay, even with all that stuff. And then ironically, things can shift from there, but you can't fake that really acceptance. You can't fake it. It doesn't work. I'm only accepting myself so I can get over it. No, it does not work.
It's so
Yeah.
funny. I was gonna say, I'm like, isn't that ironic that like, because it's funny being in this world for so long. I've seen that, and I feel like we're seeing a little more of, like, this mentality of like, I just want to fix everything and give me the psychedelic to eradicate my anxiety. And trust me, I'm very much like you. Like, my anxiety was pretty crippling my entire life, and I just thought it was, it was like me. That's it. But it was painful. And it was really getting to the point of like taking over my life and crippling and getting in the way of things. And it wasn't until, when I went on my first dieta, that was actually my intention. I was like, you know what? I can't live like this anymore. It's like, I finally started to have this awareness of like, it's physically killing me, like physically. It wasn't just like my mind and like friends and relation and job. It was everything. And it still comes up. It's not gone, but it's definitely like a million times better than it used to be. But what do you say to this mentality of, especially coming from, I think, the mass media of like, oh, psychedelics will just fix all our problems, and like, just take a mushroom or microdose and you'll be okay, and then people realize like maybe that isn't just the answer. But you just said something very important where there's this, it's kind of like this kind of societal way of just wanting to, like take over everything or like fix everything or just press a magical button and have it delivered at your door. It's kind of the same attitude with some psychedelics. Like, have you been seeing this or noticing this? And what are your views on this? I'm curious.
Yeah, it's challenging. So I have mixed feelings, primarily, it's getting people sort of to take initiative for themselves in one sense, but they're not really accepting or understanding the nature of what they're getting into. Like you probably heard this a lot. Someone says, well, if I knew what I had to go through when I started this business, I wouldn't have done it. Well, it's similar, I think, when you start getting into your own psyche. It's like, oh my God. So I see part of my job as lowering expectations and, calming it down, and just saying, it's a process.
Mm.
You may get a lot or a little out of one session or your first session with psychedelics, but whatever it is, you're going to have to, you're just, as I like to say, you're opening a door to a stairway. And the stairway leads to a place that you need more work. Right. I have to credit Ashley Booth. I had a conversation with her a number of years back. Somehow that little analogy came up, but I loved it ever since. The door to a stairway. It's not like a door. Okay. And the other thing I
A
like to
long
tell,
stairway.
yes, yeah, it's quite a long stairway, and it doesn't matter whether it goes up or down. It's the same. The other piece that I like to describe to people is, so we're going to open a door to your subconscious. When we take this psychedelic, it's going to help really open you up in ways that it hasn't. So this is big progress. Doors open, it's been shut for so long. But guess what? All that stuff that's been repressed and difficult is going to come out, and it's going to appear like things are getting worse. because now you're looking, people are not always thinking about it that way, that they're prepared. This is where psychedelics can destabilize people because they open up a little too much too fast. And then it's
Mhm.
just kind of pouring out and they're like, oh. So that's another piece, just to recognize that process. And it's another reason to have respect for the process, respect for what's locked in that room. There's a reason it's been locked in the room. You want to be gentle with it. The titration, slow and steady.
Yeah, and I'm so glad you brought that up because it has been interesting. I mean, even with my own journey of diving in and being like, wow, this is amazing, like the potential it has, like I learned that very early on, like, wow, if I got this much out of this one experience. And then I just kind of like you, I was like just diving in like big time. And then it was like, well, wait a second. Like there's now like a lifetime worth of stuff that I haven't even processed or thought about or didn't think it was even affecting me. And that was when, I realized like I need to get some support because this is not being like, quote, fixed or eradicated by this medicine. It's actually all just surfacing like deeper layers. And also, like you said, it was like deep trauma that I didn't think was even mine, or things like intergenerational, ancestral, like lineage work, like, and then not to mention the somatics, the nervous system. And so there's so many layers to it. And it's been interesting because I think people think it's just this like interesting, trippy experience. But you have studied, Gabor Mate's work, polyvagal theory, somatic work, I think even a few other things, it sounds like. And, you're very knowledgeable. I think you also help out with Gabor's program. Is that true?
Yeah, I'm currently an
Yeah.
intern in the program to be a facilitator. But I don't know that I want to be a facilitator. I just wanted to be involved still, and I like being like the intern's like a TA for the class. So it's such a
Yeah.
wonderful group, and the information is so amazing. So
Amazing.
yeah.
But yeah, let's talk about this because it's been a huge part of my own integration was the somatic work and the energetics and the compassion piece that it took me 40 years to get to that point to realize like, wow, this has been the missing piece my whole life, because probably a lot like you, like I had been in therapy for many years. I had gone over the same loops over and over and over and over for like 20 years in therapy, and I was like, well, why am I not really, why does this keep coming up? And then it wasn't until these deeper, the somatics and my system and my, understanding my nervous system and the operation and like how I was running in this like wounding pattern my entire life. And that's when things really started shifting. And a lot like you, it was actually when I started really lowering like doses of, whatever it was I was working with to really be like super present in my body and the experience. And I'm wondering if this is something you've noticed too, or like the trend, especially out in California, because I've seen this as, someone who helps out in ceremonies often where people just want to like have the big experience. And then next thing you know, they can't even sit still. And I'm like, well, is this really like helping, or is this, like you said, is it actually maybe doing more harm? Is this, creating more confusion or more anxiety? And I'm curious, what are your views on bringing in the somatics and the different, modalities into this realm of psychedelic integration?
Yeah, well, big question. I think first of all that a lot of the high dose stuff, particularly, is a lot of bypassing. Not all the time, of course, but there's a fair amount of that going on. And you can tell really easily the pandemic was really helpful another way. There were a lot of circles in the psychedelic community that when the pandemic hit, you were either on like the backside or the anti-vax or all the controversy and conspiracy that was going on. And now, regardless of which side you're on, you know, the conflict was so deep that it was splitting up groups, and people were, the same as everywhere, I suppose.
Yeah.
But if people are sitting there, in ceremony, having mystical experiences every couple of weeks, and yet they're acting this way, it doesn't really make a good case for them integrating, you might say. So that's, um, kind of, I don't think necessarily that high doses are, anything special. Let me put it that way. I think lower doses are better. In fact, I just read a recent paper that was really fascinating about psycholytic or lower dose psychedelic work that they were doing in like the 60s, I think 50s, 60s. It was a whole style of research that was fascinating. I'm like, this is the way to work. They had much more access. Like you may have heard that Cary Grant, I think, had like 50 LSD sessions or something. He credits with helping him as a person and actor and everything. And that's what the kind of work he was doing, the psycholytic work. So I think there's a lot of benefit to the definitely lower dose. And now as far as bringing other things, so another thing that I'm in the middle of training for, which is Rosen method body work, which is accessing the unconscious through touch. So it's a really wonderful. It's like it's taking, like when we're anxious or whatever we're feeling, chronically, like you're in these chronic states of um, dissociation or whatever. We hold tension in the body in different spots. So what Rosen does is it's touch, but it's not manipulative. You're not like trying to do something like a massage, but you're feeling those tension spots and bringing awareness to them, just like you might in talk therapy, bringing awareness to someone. It's like a non-judgmental, loving presence, but it's all done non-verbally because you're just meeting the tension that's there to bring awareness to it, to help open it up. And so I think bringing something like that into a more psycholytic oriented psychedelic session would be extremely powerful. And I've experimented a little bit, I must say, and it's worked out really well. There was one time I was sitting for someone and he was very restless and, just having a bit of a difficult time, but he couldn't quite sit still. And so at one point I put my hand like right here and I was there for like 45 minutes. And so then later he said, that was the turning point for him. He said he felt through my arm to my heart and that I was sincere. And that's what helped him really turn around. And he ended up having a really nice healing experience from that. So I think it can be incredibly powerful, but, having a sense of when and how to do that, because, touch is such an interesting area that's under a lot of, oh my God, don't touch anyone ever. And so, I'm not in that camp for sure. And I will note that, the way I deal with touch and clients is I will tell them ahead of time and ask permission, like the day before or days before. And then I tell them, I'm going to ask permission again, even when you're in it as well. So if we get 2 yeses, then we go. Just to clear up that little piece, because but I think touch can be incredibly powerful, and it's the risks, there's harm, that can happen certainly. So it's just it's a question of really trusting the person that's you're working with, and is it just, are they somewhat trained in touch? Like maybe a somatic experiencing person would probably be good or something like that. Mm-hmm. Anyway, but Rosen method is done on a massage table, typically, without any psychedelics, as a hands-on modality. So sort of set up that way. So you can't do a full thing, but it's I'm a big one for like, how can we combine things and make them, maybe tune in, but it's really all about creating that safety. If someone really feels held, seen, and without judgment, and you can allow them to feel that is the, I would say the key essence of healing right there.
Yeah. And I think also what you were saying about, the high dose experience, because I noticed even within myself, I used to start out really high and then I kind of dipped down for a long time as I was like really deep in my process. And then now the more regulated I've become in my body and my nervous system and grounded in like my own internal sense of safety and not operating from a trauma response for, 30 something years, now I can actually sit much easier in those higher dose experiences where because I am, in that safer place, and I know how to actually like regulate myself. But I think, like you said, it's like, well, if people are already starting out from this like very traumatic, like unsafe place to begin with, maybe the answer isn't to just constantly be, doing these high doses every week, and that's where it's been interesting because I've seen a lot of benefits of having these beautiful high dose experiences that are, super life changing. But those have really only come through when I'm in that like super calm, regulated, grounded state, which that's the challenge, right? And it's funny that you bring up touch because, like the somatic therapists I work with for many years pre-pandemic did a lot of touch. And it's actually something I've been trained in myself where, it was an in-person training program where we had done a lot of hands-on work and kind of in various somatic therapy modalities. And it has been really life-changing. And then a few years ago, or was that just last year? God, it's like time just flies. I interviewed someone very, very well known in the psychedelic world who then had a major transgression hit the media. And right before the interview was supposed to be released, I had to pull the interview because of the media that came out. And it brought up a lot of this discussion of like, well, where's the line? Because does this mean that now we're going to just say no more touching ever? Because then that defeats this, potential huge healing, this healing potential of through touch, like you said. Because I've had that too. I've had to grip onto someone's hand. I've had someone, even, the facilitator, put their hand on my heart. I've put my hand on other people's hearts. Of course it's like consent. But it's interesting because when this happened, a while ago, it was kind of like, oh, let's just, stop touching anybody ever. And it's like, well, is that really the answer? I don't think so, because there's so much healing that can happen through this. And it's exactly what you said, like creating that safety and the trust and having like, quadruple consent. And, but it has been interesting in this world, and it's funny because even the Facebook post that Paul commented on was about, essentially client, and this was actually about a therapist. It wasn't about a psychedelic facilitator, but like romantic relationships in this dynamic of therapist client and where are the boundaries. And of course, if you read the answers to this post, you have 400 people giving their own opinion, ranging from like never go there to some people saying like, let them do whatever they want, And it's an interesting world because, and I kept saying, well, as MDMA therapy starts to grow over the next few years and continues, this will probably come up a lot, right? Like around like, where are the boundaries? Do people even understand this concept of transference? And where are people, like, are people even learning this? Like, do people know anything about how to touch from a place of healing and safety versus just, from maybe not the right space? I'm curious, you've been in the psychedelia and running integration circles and very like entrenched in this, the Los Angeles psychedelic community. And, we all know there's certain people where things have come up and, and I always try to take like, look, humans all have both sides, right? Like we're all human. We're all trying to navigate this life and there's going to be some transgressions. There's probably going to be some problems because that's the nature of, being a human. But I'm curious, like, what is the air? What is the take on how to best approach this? Like how to get this right, especially as people are starting to do more underground therapy and holding space, and maybe some less trained, maybe some more trained, like it's a wild west world. What would you say is kind of like the feel out there?
Wow.
I know it's a lot
It
because it's
is.
come up so much,
It's, speaking about it, should there be touch, or maybe how you touch is one sort of angle. But I think you're talking a little bit more about well, how should just general people think about it that may not be trained in touch or thinking about it that way? My understanding of, because I think I know who you're talking about. Um, my understanding is that that whole approach was a little on the excessive side in terms of more is better, and they were following. I think the guy's name is Salvador Roquette or somebody from the '60s, and his methods are very controversial.
Yeah.
Very much. Let's throw people in the deep end and that don't know how to swim, and you swim or die. And we're going to try and help you live, but a little
Maybe
harsh.
not.
Yeah, it's kind of like the harsh parent that we're sort of trying to overcome. We need the opposite, really, not that kind of a tough, just take more blast through it. Well, you can't. Some people can, but not everyone can, and that's going to be extremely damaging. And so you don't want to force touch. Similarly, oh, you need touch, because like in there was a particular video that was out about an issue with an MDMA situation where it looked like they were forcing the client to like hug, and when the client didn't seem to really want it, that video is not pleasant to watch. And so that's is where you need to have that, respecting the person and making them feel safe is so important. And so why someone would do that, I'm not sure, but that would be, it might be good to have some general guidelines like that, but they follow typical therapeutic safety guidelines. You're creating a safe space. That means the client has to feel safe. It doesn't mean that you're enforcing your agenda on them. Oh, you need to be hugged, or you need to, whatever it is. And so you've got to, when the person feels safe, they can unfold on their own, at their own time and their own pace. It's like you say, you water the plant, you provide the perfect, soil and fertilizer and water and sun, and it'll just grow on its own. You don't have to like, okay, we're going to like do all this stuff. So that's, but it's an interesting question, because because people have to learn about safety and boundaries, if they're working with other people, and how would they get, I know that's, education is important, and not everyone's going to try to get it, I guess, but it'd be good to have like safe touch. I've been wanting to have a safe touch class at,
That'd be
psychedelia of
amazing.
some sort. And, but I haven't put that together so far, but just
Oh
as
my
an
God,
idea,
Paul,
good. I know.
a safe touch training program. I mean, it's
Yeah.
interesting because I always wonder, the training program I did was a hands-on program. And it was in a very small group with someone who I've worked with for a long time. But, I always wonder, like, well, to what extent are people being, trained in this or even discussed? Like, even this concept of, like, especially with MDMA coming, into the forefront bigger than, it's already everywhere. But, we'll see what happens. And I'm like, well, is this going to be discussed? Because, MDMA is also a little different than maybe, a mushroom session or a ketamine session. It's like a very different kind of energy and different experiences and feelings and bodily, desires can come up. And it, who knows what could happen. And I have this big fear that we're going to just hear like horror stories one after another. Cause of course, we do hear more and more, and it's also the reality of the world we live in today. It's like things are also just being reported more. We have more access to media. We all know this. It's human nature. Unfortunately, transgressions always probably went on. But it is interesting that you brought, that you talked about like there's different levels, and some are maybe a little less effective, and some are less invasive and more effective, and there's probably other ways. Something else I wanted to ask you, because I get asked this all the time, and I share actually I think a very similar opinion as you do, but people are constantly asking me like what kind of training do I need, or what like what do you recommend, and I always say, like, to me, and again, like, I don't know what every single training program teaches, because I think some are a little more, like, I've had clients go through certain programs where they said it was all brain chemistry and science and, very like head based psychedelic training, which, I'm like, well, I don't know how much that's really going to help when you have a client in a trauma response that you're sitting with. So I always say, like, the somatic work or understanding the energies and trauma informed training. But I'm curious, if you had to name like your top 3 or 4 things for people to study if they want to go hold underground space or, get into psychedelic, like hands-on work, like what would you recommend people go do and study?
Okay, that's a good one and an easy one for me, actually, because there is so much out there, and a lot of it I'd say is way overpriced. But that's just my perspective. Not saying that they don't offer good things, depending. But to me, the most important things, if I had to just pick one, I would probably pick rosin, even though it has nothing to do with psychedelics whatsoever.
Wow.
And why do I say that? Because when you go to a rosin intensive training, so to become a rosin practitioner, you have to do 6-week-long intensives. And so, you're really immersed in the work. And they create a space that is so welcoming, and there's no like discussion about this or that. They're just holding you where you are. And it's beautifully done. I've never seen any groups hold space better. I've seen groups hold space as well, but nothing better. And I felt so just healed, a little bit more together after one of those intensive trainings. I think everyone should at least just do one of those. That would be my, because that's the felt sense experience. And I was on a call once with Marcella from MAPS. I think she's the lead therapist at MAPS. And someone asked her, what are the most important things to being a psychedelic facilitator? And her answer was 2 things. One, self-care. And the second one was do your own work. You can really, and you understand this more as you do your own work, you can only take someone as far as as comfortable as you are yourself, as well as you can hold your own space. So that's where I would say if I just had to pick one, because rosin it's an experiential thing. It's not, because you can learn and read books and you can know more than your class teacher, who knows, but it's that felt sense that you can't just read yourself into. And so aside from that, I would say compassionate inquiry. It's a pretty extensive program. You learn a lot about being trauma informed. It's 18 months long, approximately, if you're going to go through the whole thing to get certified. And as part of it, you're working on each other. So the part of it is doing your own work. It's built into that program, and it's just it's elegant. And Gabor grabs stuff from everywhere. So you have, like, I'd say, the best of everything in trauma informed work with that. So that's one piece that you would need, some kind of trauma informed. The second piece would be some kind of somatic piece, like a rosin method, or maybe somatic experiencing, or Hakomi can be, has that same attitude. Not, the thing I like about rosin is that it actually involves hands-on touch. Not so many modalities do that. And then the third thing, of course, well, I guess maybe there's 4. The third one would be you need to have some sense of the transpersonal, and what someone's talking about. If they're talking about something that's like some total non-dual issue, you want to be able to recognize what they're talking about and be able to talk that language and weave it into the day-to-day life. And then the last thing, you need to be familiar with psychedelics.
That might help. Maybe a little. No, I'm kidding.
Nothing work, exactly. So a lot of people, like myself included, when I was a teenager, I was like Mr. LSD as a teenager. So, I had a lot of experience with psychedelics. And so, I know that there's a lot of people coming in that don't have it. And that's another little argument in the space. Do they need to know? And I'd say, yes, they do need to know. Can they? I think they can do some without it, if you're a good therapist. But you're going to miss those pieces that are, having been in the space and knowing really what that feels like. So that's my sort of answer. Compassion inquiry, Rosen, some
Yeah.
kind of, Alan Watts. I just love Alan Watts. To me, he says a lot of what everyone's saying now, only he said it better then.
Yeah.
So I'm a
Elegant.
very elegant guy. Yeah. So Ram Dass,
Amazing. And it's,
Ram Dass.
oh yeah, Ram Dass, of course. No, it's funny that you said that. Like, do people actually need to have an actual psychedelic experience? And the interview I had before you, this came up with the psychedelic CEOs of these
Oh, right.
huge venture backed companies that are getting into this space. And I was like, well, do they even have any experience? And a lot of them don't. Some do. They're not all like in the same camp. But it is very interesting to think like, wow, there's people really like dedicating their whole life to this and billions of dollars that have like not really even had the experience to know what it's about. But who am I to judge? But I definitely agree with you on on a particular level, especially if you're getting into facilitation, therapy, and space holding. That's like a very different story than maybe just running some kind of venture backed company. But Paul, like I'm so glad to bring you on and discuss all this. So I want to give you a few minutes to talk about, the work you do, what do you offer, what do you have coming up? I think you should definitely offer some kind of class on safe touch and how to go about that. That would be a big hit. But yeah, like where can people learn about what you offer? And I'd love to hear.
Well, Psychedelia Integration is, one place, and there's a group of us. It's not just me that runs that, or that is part of Psychedelia. We have 7 integration circles every month, different facilitator for each one. So, like I run mine once a month, and everyone else runs theirs once a month. We're going to try and add some, because this is something I think is really would be really useful, is closed group, instead of, because our groups right now are pretty open for everyone. So we're going to want to add a closed group, meaning that someone would sign up for 5 weeks at once. So this way you have the same people. You can build up some trust. Anyway, but that hasn't come about yet. So, but people can, if they want to do my integration circle, they can come through Psychedelia. We're on Eventbrite and our website and all that. And then my own, kind of eclectic oriented approach through Panimus Integration. And, I have all the different little offerings. Right now, I'm not certified as a Rosen practitioner, so I don't really, I'm doing some practice sessions for free once in a while, but I'm still in that. It's a 3.5-year program, and I'm, about a little more than halfway through. I've done 4 of my 6 intensives I have to do. And then there's like a year and a half of supervision and, getting your hours to get that one in. Because that's something you can't just read out of a book. You have to you need to be apprenticed, touch here and feel this tension or whatever. So, I find it very exciting. I'm very drawn to that. I've been, looking into bioenergetic exercises now, and Wilhelm Reich and Alexander Lowen and all those people. So it's yet another rabbit hole. Me and Alice, we're just hanging out in the rabbit holes. And what else? I do some journey work. If someone's interested in that, they can go to my Panimus website, and there is a little section on there about that. So, I always do that in a legal and safe way where I do not provide anything. So I think that's pretty, I guess I can note, the Convergence. There's a big Convergence conference coming up in LA at the end of March, is it?
Yeah,
Put on by
April, March.
Psychedelics Today. Yeah, and so I'll be speaking at that. I'll be on a panel, I believe. And I'll be doing a
Nice.
little body-based workshop as well.
Ooh, fun. I hope to be there.
Yeah, it'll be great to meet you.
We'll definitely meet. Well, Paul, it was so good to have you on and to hear about all this and talk psychedelic integration and hear your journey. And thank you so much for doing this incredible work for the world and for yourself and, putting yourself out there and taking time to comment on Facebook posts too. So it's important, like this education is how we all learn and learn how to discern and really, feel into what works best for all of us. So thank you so much for sharing all this. It was great to have you here.
Yes, thank you so much, Beth. Pleasure. And if I can leave everyone with one thought, this is from a meme that I saw that I just love so much. And it's, I gave myself care when it wanted destruction. And that's when my healing began.
I love it. I'm like, that sounds familiar.
Yeah, it's been around perhaps. But
Words of wisdom.
yeah, right.
Thank you so much, Paul. It was great to have you.
Thank you, Beth, so much.